Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's selection comes at us from Kevin. Howdy, Bryan. Since you enjoyed my last selection of Captain Beefheart so much, I've decided to introduce you to another one of my favorite bands, The Residents. This time I'll ease you into the band with an easygoing rendition of a classic rock staple. This is their take on Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones. Enjoy! On the topic of Beefheart, I do feel a little bad about that reaction. There is some positive element to it that I wish I had done. And in retrospective, I probably should have talked about, specifically the performance aspect. But I don't think I was in a good headspace that day, and being given such a difficult track, I wasn't able to work with it. So I'm kind of tempted to do a second chance on that one sometime in the future. But that's not what we're here for today. Let's check out the Residence's rendition of Satisfaction. I can kind of hear it. It's so difficult not to compare it to the original. It's so funny too because like the whole thing of this section is groove between the I can't get no and the guitar riff. They're working in tandem rhythmically, and they specifically deconstruct and subvert that. See, what's really interesting with this compared to Beefheart, which I think this is going to be my only comparison, is simply that I have a point of comparison for this. Oh no, they have a cover of Jailhouse Rock. Okay, so this is something. I think on the surface level, it's really interesting to read the dissonance, the harmonic dissonance, of course. The instruments are consistently being played out of tune with each other. Some notes I think are just wrong. they're they're right in the general sense in that if you look at the original guitar riff and the intervals between all the notes, the intervals are the same. They're just started on the wrong original note. So we're still going up, a half step and then a whole step and then down a whole step, whatever the pattern of intervals are. We're still doing that same pattern. We've just started from a different point, but it's like only one of the instruments did that. So they're slightly out of tune with each other, but there's also dissonance rhythmically. Not every instrument starts their riff on the beats, which kind of creates this anti-groove like I was talking about earlier with the whole thing about the I can't get no section is that the groove of the drums and the guitar lick and the vocal idea are all in sync in a way that creates this really strong element of groove. And here, separating them all just a hair completely disrupts that flow that Rolling Stones had originally crafted for that section. And we can look at all the ways that the dissonance is utilized harmonically, metrically, melodically, and the way that it's almost an anti-groovy song. Like Satisfaction's a pretty groovy track from start to finish. It is hard not to move your body to it, and this is anti-groove. Is that what we can call it? But also the just gnarly tones that go along with all of this as well, and the hyper compression on it, and the screeching in the vocal. Like there's just a lot of aspects in this that are gritty, dirty. As much as I don't like to use this word, typically I think it's appropriate here. It's kind of disgusting in a lot of ways. Uh, Purposefully, I think the intention is to create something that is difficult to look at. But like I was alluding to at the beginning, I think it's really interesting to view this piece through the lens of someone who is so fed up with not being able to find this satisfaction. I don't know all of the lyrics, and we'll get into that in a bit. I've actually, as much as I know the original, everybody knows the original. You've heard it in some fashion before, even if it's just the chorus in a commercial or something. I don't know the words of this track, which is really baffling to think about when you realize you've heard something so often in your life. But I do think it's interesting. This is one of those opportunities, I think, where you can hear a song and realize that there is a schism between the lyrical themes and the musical themes, and say, hey, I can fix that. And I don't necessarily say this is better. This is a different version, and as with most versions of a song, I will view them in parallel, not one being better or another one being worse or anything like that. But I do think it's really interesting when you have that divide and someone comes along and marries them a little bit better. Now, aside from the comparisons to the original, this one it's really difficult to talk about on its own because I feel like every decision was done so in comparison to the original. It was groovy, so ours isn't. It was harmonious, so ours isn't. It was clearly heard with clean production, so ours isn't. And it's really difficult for me to get outside of that mindset. But I do think it's intriguing to try to look at this on its own merits and see what it brings to the table. And the more I listened, the more I couldn't find much. Musically, at least, it seems that what is on paper is one for one, minus a couple of tonal shifts, like I'd mentioned earlier, starting on the wrong note or starting on a different note, but keeping the intervals between the notes. After all, we can still hear that core famous guitar lick here. It just isn't the right notes. But the lick itself is still right. And when we get to the vocals, the rhythms are mostly correct. The pitches are mostly correct too, but it's just delivered in a way that isn't the original. And so the end result is that the music is the same, but the performance is different. And that's what makes it difficult to separate the two, because this is not a reimagining of the track so much as it is a distorted cover. In a sense, this is, well, what we would call in the classical realm an arrangement. It is a liberally adjusted arrangement, but an arrangement is when you take all of the music that was present in the original and give them to different instruments. The song itself should not change fundamentally. It should still be recognizable, but your timbres are going to be a little different. Um, and that's pretty much what happens here. The music is the same. It's just given to these gnarly buzzsaw guitars and this hyper compressed screaming vocals and this very muffled muted drum kit rather than what the Rolling Stones originally played it on. Whereas a total reimagining might rewrite some of the music. It might create different vocal lines, lyrics. It might create totally different melodies, but retain the lyrics. If you've ever listened to a song and the music is completely different, but you recognize the lyrics, that would be a reimagining or even a remake of it. I don't know if we have a proper musical term for that, but what most people call a cover, which is pretty close to the original where it's fairly recognizable, that's going to be an arrangement in the musical world. And that's what I would classify this as. And that, like I said, that makes it difficult to separate from the comparison to the original, because so much of it still owes itself to the original, and the oddities are there in contrast. If this wasn't Satisfaction, and maybe this was an original track, or maybe it was a cover of a track I wasn't familiar with, it would just be a noisy song, and I don't know that I'd have a lot to say about it. Or maybe I'd have more to say about it. I honestly don't know. That's a parallel dimension where I'm not privy to that knowledge. But because it is a track I do understand, it's difficult to separate the two. I feel like I've talked too much about the comparison, though. The sonic atmosphere of this is just overall aggressive. The guitar tones utilized, as I called them, are buzz saws. They are just gnarly. The harmonic elements of this are constantly dissonant. The two guitars are consistently out of tune with each other. A good faith read would be microtonal. Though I do firmly believe they intentionally went for dissonant dyads between the two guitars. The bass is barely audible at all thanks to the production. The drums are exceptionally muffled, and the vocals are completely dominating this track, being hyper compressed upon themselves. To where even a slight push into a higher range ends up becoming a shrill shriek. And anytime the vocals are present, they completely dominate everything else in the song. It is a top heavy song. The bass is pretty much completely removed. It reminds me a lot of lo-fi black metal. And it's all done in a way to be antagonistic and abrasive. There is very little, if any, aspect of this track that is palatable in any traditional sense. And I was about to say, and that's because, and bring it back to the compare. I gotta stay away from the comparison. It's just so difficult to. So, what does this song say to me? Trying to avoid the connections to the lyrics at the moment, and I don't know. Other than just abrasion, it's a song that doesn't want me to groove to it. It doesn't want me to enjoy myself. It doesn't want to be beautiful in any aspect. It is gritty and dark and muffled and loud. And it made me not want to listen to it as the song progressed. Um, but it's gotta be all intentional, right? I honestly think that that is the best analysis I've got for this. Is that a lot of the decisions in all of the abrasiveness and dissonant aspects, not just harmonically, but rhythmically, sonically. Everything about it is done to contrast heavily, not just to be different from, but to be completely on the opposite side of the spectrum of the original. And its intention, I believe, might have been to pull out a different concept to the song, to approach it on a different thematic level than the original did. Where the original was probably the music was probably crafted first as a catchy song, and the lyrics were on there for a second reason. This one explores the lyrical themes and wonders what music could be crafted to further explore them sonically. That's my guess. So, I suppose this is a good time to see what this song has actually been about my entire life. Anybody who knows this track is probably having a laugh at me when I said I'm going to go see what this song's been about my whole life, because in a twist of fate that perfectly matches up with my interpretation of the residents here, they've rewritten the lyrics. You see, the verse 1 says, "When I'm at the football game and the jack falls down and fumbles and his skull goes back and he breaks his neck, I just laugh and crack my knuckles." And at this point, I was thinking, well, that surely can't be what the Rolling Stones song was about. But maybe it was. It's dark, but it's not dark. So I kept reading. Then we get to verse 2. "When I'm at the picture show and I can't get no popcorn and I grab a knife." And I'm like, no, this is not what Rolling... So I had to go look at what the Rolling Stones song was about. And Rolling Stones follows... I mean, it follows along. They wrote it. The original is very similar in this: when I'm doing this and this and this happens, and and then my reaction to that, right? So he says, when I'm watching the TV and a man comes on and tells me how white my shirts can be, well, he can't be a man because he doesn't smoke the same cigarettes as me, so I can't get no satisfaction. All right. So it's about observing these moments in life where he feels dissatisfied with the events happening around him. And so this is a bit of a subversion to that. Interestingly, off of verse 1, we do have satisfaction. There is an event that happens that is horrific to probably most around our narrator, but they laugh at it. Verse 2 talks about not being able to get popcorn, so grabbing a knife, stabbing at the popcorn, beating up on somebody, I think. And he says, and you think I'm all messed up? Well, I think you're all messed up. And there's a satisfaction to this violent reaction to the events around them. It's not just about saying, "Well, that sucks," and now I'm satisfactionless. It's about taking action to become satisfied with the situation, to at least feel a little bit of relief. A lot of it is sort of messed up. He says, when I'm going to my job and I'm riding on the bus and I grit my teeth and I clench my fist and I rip up this whole bus, I can't get no satisfaction. And so it's almost a subversion of this idea that it's still about these unfortunate situations, much like the original is, but there's usually some sort of glee in violence or a violent outburst that brings at least a momentary bit of satisfaction to our narrator. And so we don't have just a grittying and dirtying up of the song itself, a subversion and deconstruction of the original into something that is grossly grotesque. Fantastic vocabulary there, Bryan. Grossly grotesque, but also a subversion and disruption and perversion of the lyrics as well, taking a lot of the core ideas and reconstructing them into something that fits the gnarly and disastrous world, the sonic world that the music has taken us on as well. I can't say I'm a massive fan of the track, which I don't think is going to be a huge surprise, but I like what's going on here. Bear with me for a moment. This is sort of like parody music. When I say that, I think most people are going to think of Weird Al. At least in the older crowd. Weird Al, I don't know, is really, he's not too big these days. I don't know who a younger person would think of. I don't know if there's some YouTuber who does parody music these days that they might associate that term with. But I think most of the older crowd are going to think of Weird Al. Kind of a big name for parody music. The thing with Weird Al, though, is he didn't touch the music. All he did was change the lyrics. And yes, sometimes he did change the music sonically. Big fan of the accordion, big fan of polka. He did polkafy a lot of songs. So there is some times when the music would be altered, but many of the bigger hits are have no change to the music at all. Perfectly recreated in most instances, just changing the lyrics around to fit comedy into them. There is another kind of parody, not in the music realm, but specifically for some reason my mind goes straight to some of the dirtier, grittier parody that we had when we were younger. I'm thinking of stuff like Mad TV and what was the that nasty, like we had they had Cabbage Patch Kids, right? And then they had like the Garbage Pail Kids. Is that what it was? And they had like collectible cards for all this like gooey, gross, nasty stuff that was kind of like Cabbage Patch Kids, but just like radical '90s grossness. Um, and that sort of parodying something by looking at the inverse of it. That was really big in the '90s. When did this come out? 77. So yeah, this would predate that by a bit, but it's the same sort of concept that I see. It's parody through the inverse, which I think is a fascinating way to go about this. I've never thought about doing this with music before, but it absolutely is possible. It's not about trying to find a new truth hidden in a track by exploring new sounds to pair with lyrics or new lyrics to pair with a sound, but it's about trying to find the complete tonal opposite. And even in this case, lyrical opposite that also runs parallel. And that's a really neat concept that I've just never thought of before, the Mad TV of music. Again, like I said, I'd probably never listen to this track again. I'm not going to completely turn away the Residents in the future, and I'm always down to see what else they do, but it's not a band I'm too interested in exploring on my own. But this concept is very cool, and I don't know if they came up with it. I don't know if there's other bands that are more well known for it, but I've never heard anything like it before. Those are my thoughts on the Residents' version of Satisfaction. What did you think? Was there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on, or something you heard that I didn't even touch on? Put those thoughts down in the comments. Above that is a description box. In there you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find ways to support the channel. You can find my music, the Discord server, so you can chat with the community, so much more. Go ahead and check that out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. Alright, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though. We'll continue exploring this week's theme and check out another special selection. Push the button a little early, but until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.